Hello and welcome to week 9 of hard surface modeling for films. This week we'll be cutting and laying out UVs. We'll look at different methods of creating UVs. We'll cut and sew our UV seams, and we'll explore different methods of UV unfolding. Then we'll work on packing UVs. We'll talk about figuring out and setting consistent textile density across your model. We'll determine how many texture UDIMs will be needed, and we'll explore Maya's different packing algorithms. Finally, we'll do some final model prep. We'll remove all keyframes and constraints so we can mirror our symmetrical hierarchy with frozen transformations. And then we'll look at reapplying those constraints. Let's get started. Alright, so as I mentioned last week, this is the week to add any final touches to your model. And as you can see, I've added these emblems on here. And there's actually 4 of them. I built them in the exact same way as we built the greebles. Just found some images online and traced them out and extruded. But you can see that these are actually pretty low poly, and they are built so that they stay polygonal at render time, so they don't subdivide. And you can see this one has a smooth kind of baked into it. That's why you see the strange kind of spider webbing topology around there. These kind of details kind of add that human scale to your model. But anyway, let's start on our UVs. So first order of business is to delete our duplicate left side. We're going to definitely be UVing one side and mirroring over. And for now, let's hide the left side, and we'll focus on the C space vet null. Notice that since we already built our greebles with UVs, that we can go ahead and hide the greeble null, and we can start working on the body panels. So there are several ways to create UVs. If you go to the UV menu, you can see there's automatic, there's cylindrical, planar. You'll find that 9 times out of 10 I'm using the planar mapping. And that's because those other methods of projecting UVs automatically cut your seams for you. And I like having that extra level of control over where my seams are cut. And honestly, for a lot of these body panels, since they're single-sided meshes, we can pretty much just planar map and unfold without making any cuts. So if we do the planar map and then right-click on the unfold button, you can see that we have 2 methods up here, unfold 3D and legacy. Legacy is the original Maya unfold algorithm, while the unfold 3D was added I think a couple versions ago, but it's actually a really good algorithm. I usually set my iterations here to 10, and I turn off the pack feature. Map size is 4096, and I just hit apply. So you can see we're getting these kind of weird butterfly results, and this is really not ideal for packing. So a lot of times with this unfold 3D, I find that if you deselect some UVs that you and unfold again, that you get pretty good results. And for this one, I'm going to actually grab these UVs in the center here and align them with each other, and basically flatten them out. A lot of times we want our UVs to have symmetry, and one of the ways you can get symmetry is to actually delete one side of your model and mirror it. And then you get kind of 2 identical shells on top of each other. And then you can pull your duplicate side off and flip it so they're both, the UVs are both facing the same way. And then you can kind of just sew the edges together. And that's kind of the old way of doing it, but in this new version of Maya, there's actually this Symmetrize tool, and this is a new tool that's in 2017, and it actually works pretty well. There's also this relatively new UV diagnostic shader, which we went over briefly before, but I'm going to just double check all these pieces as I lay them out. So I think I'll cut these scoop pieces out, and then I'll put a seam on top of them, and then let's go ahead and unfold everything. And I think I want this fender to be a little more vertical. So I'll just rotate these UVs into place. I'll just unfold these UVs that are kind of in the center, and maybe we could move these UVs down and try to get a better result. So now if I move all these kind of to the center of 0 to 1, snap these center points to the center axis of the grid, you can see that the move tool in the UV window has its own set of tool settings. So I just go in there and I can turn off retain component spacing so I can snap. So now I think I'll rotate this back a little bit, and then I'll just resolve some of these UVs. I'll move this down here, but I'm not sure if the symmetrize tool will actually reflect both sides. So let me click the symmetrize tool. I'll select this edge in the center, and then you literally just brush around and it will symmetrize your UV shell. That's pretty neat. Looks like it only works on one shell at a time though. So I've gone back and done the mirror trick just to get that symmetry, even though this doesn't really matter at this stage because I'm going to repack it anyway. So next, let me unfold this piece. Getting kind of crooked results. And let me use the symmetrize tool on this as well. So just snap those to the center. And let me just unfold this one side just to be sure. And so now the symmetrize tool isn't working on this piece, and I notice now that it's actually not symmetrical. At some point I did some work on the left side of this piece and I didn't reflect that work over to the right. So I'm going to just delete the right side and remirror this part. And now I can use the other method where I grab the right side, flip it in U, and then I'll just move and sew the edges there in the center. And that's going to be good enough for now. So with the hood, I'll just do a planar map from the front, align this down the center, rotate it into place, and then I'll just align these edges down the center, snap them to the center point of the grid. Let me grab this right side and unfold again, and then I'll just use the symmetrize tool just to make sure everything's symmetrical on the hood. So now I can move on to some other parts. This piece, let's just planar map it and unfold again. And just check for the distortion. It looks pretty good. So I'm going to just snap this, unfold the one side, and then use the symmetrize tool. And then just hide it when I'm done. So this piece, I'll just unfold it, and you know, I'll just do the same symmetrize trick. It looks like it's pretty symmetrical already. So you can see the kind of repetition of this process. The glass, let's fix this to the center, unfold the one side, and use the symmetrize tool. You can just hide the glass. Now let's do the last, which is the quarter panel. So just go ahead and unfold that, rotate that into place, and unfold, and then symmetrize this piece as well. It's pretty close, but this will make it perfect. So now the only pieces I have left in the center null are these emblems. And you can see that there's actually 4 different shaders on them right now. So I want to actually separate the UVs based on those shaders. So let me grab all my emblems. And let's just do a planar map real quick, just to get some UVs on there. And then let's unfold. I want to separate the UVs on these emblems based on what material is assigned to them. So you can see that there's 4 materials that make up these emblems. There's red, black, white, and silver. And what I can do is use the hypershade. Let me just pull it open, and then I can basically right click on shaders in here, select objects with material, and then I can just do a planar map, and that'll just planar map those faces that are selected. So now the UVs of my emblems are separated by material, and when I pack the UVs later, I'll organize them accordingly. So that pretty much wraps up the center null. Let's get started on the left null. Let me go ahead and unhide my NURBS curves, and then that way we can hide these engines. Let's take a look at the Greeble null. Let me sort the hierarchy alphabetically. Basically all the Greebles here are UV'd, but there are a few custom pieces. This large blocker box, these engine pipes, and this small wing up front all need UVs. Now, a lot of these Greebles, as I mentioned before, came from the Falcons, so they need to be labeled as polygonal meshes because they are not built to subdivide. So I'm just going to go ahead and open comment rename, and I can replace the suffix of STM with PLY. One of the things that's important when you're unfolding UVs is you want your meshes to all have uniform scale. So I'm going to grab all my meshes and do a freeze scale, and to do that you right click in the channel box, go down to freeze, and just select scale. When you do the Maya freeze transforms, that freezes all the transforms. Maya automatically will flip normals on negatively scaled pieces, but since I've only frozen the scale, Maya doesn't know to flip normals on certain pieces. So we might see some pieces show up as black. That just means they have reverse normals, and I can go ahead and flip those. Let's cut some UVs for this box, and I'm going to, since this is such a boxy shape, I'm going to actually use the automatic mapping. The automatic mapping basically creates an array of planar mappings from 6 sides, like a cube, and it splits the UV shells based on what direction the normals are facing. And I'm going to grab a lot of these edges except for this bottom edge here, and then I'll just sew them together. And then what I can do is grab these 2 edges on these corners and just sew those together. And now just unfold everything, and I've got that box UV. That was pretty fast and painless. So let me give myself some room here. So now I'll just planar map this first pipe and cut the edge down the bottom and unfold. And now I can grab the others and transfer attributes to get the UVs on all 4 of them, and make sure I delete history afterward. So now let me do this wing piece here, and I think I might do automatic. Actually, I think I'll do a planar map instead, and sort of treat this piece as if it were a cylinder, which it essentially is. Cut this edge and cut this edge around, but leave one connected, and then when I unfold you can see the shape that I'm getting. Now my entire Greeble nulls actually has UVs, and I can go ahead and hit the pack tool, and I'll just hit the pack tool with default settings and see what I get. Not necessary at this point, but it'll kind of help me stay organized. So now let's move on to the door, and I'll just planar map the door since all these pieces are just single-sided geometry. I can just planar map them and unfold. So let me move on to this mirror. I can do the same with the front part of the mirror since they're both, since the actual reflective surface of the mirror and the bezel that mirror sits in are single-sided meshes. But for the arm that the mirror attaches to, though, I'm going to have to do some cutting. So I think I'll cut down the middle of the back side of it, and I'll cut this kind of head piece off, and I'll just cut a seam along the bottom and this front cylindrical part so it unfolds kind of like a cylinder would. And now when I look at the when I look at the UV distortion, I'm getting a little more distortion on the tip of it than I would like, so I'm actually going to cut this cylindrical part on the end out and unfold both parts. And now you can see I've gotten rid of that distortion. So that piece is looking pretty good. I can just go ahead and pack the door before I hide it. So just hide the L door null. Let's do the wing now. I'll do planar again with the wing. So let me first cut out this section on the back, and I'll cut out this section that's going to end up being the reflector for the light. And now I can move the rest of the wing out. Let me just unfold those two pieces. And cut out this bottom part, except for these two edges. And I'll cut along this, I'll cut along the back here. Let me turn my border edges on. I usually have texture border edges on all the time, but for some reason in this file they just weren't on, so I have to kind of turn them on for every piece, but it's good for me to see where the texture seams actually are. So let me cut there and I'll unfold. You can see that this point that on the front of the wing that kind of juts out, it isn't ideal the way it's unfolding. So I think I'm going to actually cut a seam down the center of the front. You can see there's kind of some compression where that's kind of getting, the UVs that are kind of getting bent there. And I think what I'll do is I'll actually connect the edge along the back, and then this should unfold a little better. So sometimes the unfold tool will do something very strange, and if that ever happens, try switching to Legacy, and Legacy might do a better job. I've noticed that in some strange cases, certain pieces don't unfold well with Unfold 3D, but usually if they don't unfold well with one, they'll unfold well with the other. So I just switch it to Legacy in that case, and I get better results. So now let's do this kind of rudder piece. I'll just cut around that edge and unfold. And that was pretty quick and easy. And now for the lens of the marker light, I'm going to just planar map and unfold that. And then I'll just pack up the wing really quickly and hide it. So let's do the front wing now. So the front wing's got these screws, and if I just planar map and unfold the screw, you can see there's some distortion, but these things are so small that I don't think that's going to matter very much. So I'm just going to unfold this first one, and then I'll transfer the UVs to the others. Now I can go ahead and pack those. This piece is kind of just a one-sided mesh, so I'll just planar map and unfold. And I think for this wing, I'll cut off this top edge. And then I'll just cut these edges along the front and back, and then that'll unfold it pretty nicely. So now let me hide those pieces that I've completed. For this piece, I'll just planar map and cut it down the center, so it'll open kind of like a hot dog bun. And now I'll just transfer the UVs to the others, and delete history and hide them. So now with this piece, I'll just do a planar map. Actually, let me do this cable first. With the cable, I'll just planar map and then cut a seam down the side of it, the inner side of it. But what's awesome is if I use the Unfold 3D algorithm on these cables, it does a great job of straightening them out. And that's one of the major strengths of Unfold 3D. So planar map and unfold on this bracket here, you can see there's a lot of distortion along the kind of top edge of this piece. So I'm going to cut that out from the rest of it. And you can see how I've selected those edges and cut them. So let me actually cut this front section out as well, and then I will move and sew it. And I'll just move and sew it to the front here. And for these boxy shapes, it's a good idea to cut the corners and unfold. I'm just going to make sure I haven't selected the edges on the other part. Now let's just grab everything and do an unfold. So actually, let me cut the corners on these parts as well. And just unfold everything. So that's helped a little bit. So now for these little clips, I'm actually just going to cut them in half, except for this edge here. I like to leave that one edge sewn so the two sides stay together. It just helps me be more organized when I'm texture painting to have the two shells attached to each other. So now let me cut this last cylinder, just kind of my typical workflow for cutting cylinders. And yeah, let's pack the front wing and move on. So now let me grab these radiator fins, and I'll stick with my planar map. I think I'm going to select these back faces. And I'll just go to edge perimeter, and I'll just deselect this one edge and I'll cut it. And then I think what I'll do is grab this edge here and just cut it, and I'll reattach this front edge. Cool, so now I've got this kind of pretty good layout for the radiator fin. And I'll just go ahead and transfer it to the others and pack. And I can hide that group. So you can see we've got a lot of tubes. These three were negatively scaled, so their normals are flipped after I froze the scale. So I'm just going to go ahead and reverse their normals. I think I'll work with that, yeah. So now let me cut these pipes on the front. I'll just select kind of the innermost edge where the seam will be hidden. Cut and unfold. So let me turn on my border edges for these pieces. Grab all these pipes in the front and just select Actually, I have to select one edge at a time. Cut, select the edge, cut, select the edge, cut, select the edge, cut, etc. And now when I grab all these and unfold, you can see the Unfold 3D does a pretty good job with them. So let me just go ahead and hide those. So now all these wires that I made, since I made them from simple cylinders, they actually have some UVs on them. And what I can do is just select those existing UVs and just unfold. And that kind of has saved me all that time. So now when I pack them, you can see that the UVs are actually pretty nice. So now let me get this kind of muffler piece, and I'll get all these other pipes that shoot off of it and just cut them down the back. This edge looks like it's a little funky, but I think it's fine. So now I just unfold everything, and you see the results I get. This smaller pipe down here, just going to cut it down the back and unfold. And same with these wires, I'm just going to planar map them. Cut them down the back side here, and then I'll just unfold them. But you can see how nice and straight these actually get. So now I'm going to actually select all the screws. I'm going to select all the screws that go on these clips, and I'll just do planar mapping on them and unfold. And we should just get the same kind of UVs as we got on the screw on the front wing. So now if I grab all those, if I zoom in, you can kind of see the UVs we're getting. So now let me work on this clip part. And I'll actually use automatic mapping since this is a pretty complicated part. But I want to sew together the surface that kind of goes along the top edge of the clip. And I'll leave the two sides kind of separate, because there's just not a really clean way of connecting these shells. So now I'll go through and transfer the UVs to all the other clips. Now I can delete history, unhide all the tubes and wires, and I'll just pack them. And you'll notice that this wire here is kind of, it looks wrong. It looks like the UVs didn't get cut for some reason. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut in an edge and unfold. And then I'll grab all the contents of that group and just pack them really quickly. So that's looking pretty good. I'll go ahead and hide that group. And now let me do the headlights and tail lights. So there are pieces in each headlight that have the bump map on them, the glass bump shader. And I'm going to want to make sure that I don't change those UVs. I like those UVs how they are, so I just want to make sure that I don't affect those UVs at the moment. Now later, if I texture paint this, I'll definitely want those UVs to be laid out with the rest. But for now, since we're going to render those parts with bump without texturing it, I'll just leave them as is. So now let me grab all the rest of the pieces and planar map them. And then I'll just go in and cut the pieces and unfold them. So you can see I'll cut these kind of cylindrical pieces that mount the headlights. And you can see that all the rest of the headlight pieces we already kind of UV'd earlier. But I'll just go ahead and planar map them and unfold, and you can see the results we're getting. But I do kind of want to fix the light bulb. I think what I'll end up doing with the light bulb here is just moving and sewing all these edges, and then just cutting down the middle and re-sewing that face. So now we've got essentially like two halves of a sphere. So now I can transfer the attributes to the other bulb. And let me just unhide these pieces and pack them. Oh, and you notice that the one kind of errored out, and that is because I forgot to delete the history. So we'll just go ahead and pack those and hide them. And now let's look at the tail lights. I'll just uncut and unwrap these canisters here. Actually, I'll cut them along the top because that's kind of where they crash into the rest of the body. Let me just sew these circular parts back on, and then I'll transfer the UVs, delete history. So now I'll actually grab lens B and lens, I think D are the ones that all have bump on them. And I'll just hide them for now, just so they're kind of out of my way. And now for the rest, actually looks like these kind of secondary rings in the lights didn't have very good UVs associated with them. So I'm going to just go ahead and cut these seams in the back of them. And I'll unfold them. Check my border edges, but they look pretty good. I mean, they're not perfect. There's some distortion, but I think it'll be okay for what I'm doing. So now let me grab this screw, and these screws I've kind of extended a little bit so they stick through the glass. So I'm actually gonna cut that kind of cylindrical edge around the base of the screw and just unfold it. And now I can transfer UVs to all the others. And then I can transfer UVs from the front headlight bulbs to the back headlight bulbs. Now let me go ahead and pack these. Pack the headlight parts, except for the parts we don't want to change that have the bump maps. Now I can actually it looks like one of these is backward, and it looks like it's this one. So I'm just going to grab the UVs here. And I'm just going to grab the UVs there and reverse them. So now I can hide my tail light nulls. So let's approach these landing legs. It looks like when we froze the transforms, these ball parts of the ball and sockets on these shocks actually moved. So I'm just going to grab their vertices, align them with their kind of center point, and then I'll just move the vertices, make sure I'm in object mode so it retains the component space, and I'll just kind of align them again, and they seem to still be behaving properly. So for one reason or another, maybe the pivot was set differently when I froze the scale, or something like that. But anyway, moving the vertices into place seems to work. So let me go ahead and do that for both of these landing gear legs. So align it with that center point, and align it that way as well. Just align my pivot again with this center point, and then just align the ball itself with the socket over here. And we've got these hydraulics in their rightful place. So you'll remember that when I was building these landing gears, I started from the hydraulics that I built, but which were already UV'd. But some of these parts I actually modified and stretched out, so I'm going to want to make sure that I go in and unfold them, and that will change the proportions of the UVs a little bit. But that's a pretty quick thing to do when you already have the stuff basically cut. So these rubber pads on the bottom, I'm just going to planar map and unfold them. You can see that there's some distortion, but I think these will be pretty forgiving since they're just kind of rubber pads, and they're not going to have like a crazy amount of detail painted into them, so I think they'll be okay. So now I just have to UV this top mounting point and this foot part. So for the foot, I'm going to actually automatic map it, and then I'll just start sewing the faces together. And actually, I'm going to want to cut this top part out. Sometimes when you do the automatic mapping, if you have stuff at an angle, you'll kind of have pieces that butt up against each other that you're not going to want, so you just kind of have to pay attention so you cut out all the right things. You'll notice that when I unfolded those with the Unfold 3D, that they kind of curved a little bit, but when I switched to Legacy, it unfolded and kept them straight. So just another one of those things about the different algorithms. So let me automatic map this top part. I'll just go ahead and start sewing some edges together. But I think I'm going to actually keep these parts separate. And I'll start sewing faces on this side. And let me cut this face. You'll notice that it had the same problem there. Alright, so now I can sew these edges over here. One of the goals of this process is to keep the UVs with as few shells as possible. That's just going to help at texture painting time because it's a lot easier to keep track of stuff when there's fewer shells. So let me pack that leg all together. And what's cool is I can kind of just go to the front view and then grab the two pieces that are beside each other and just transfer the UVs over from front to back. So I'm going to want to make sure that I unfold those the rest of those shock pieces. And actually now I'll grab everything and just pack it together. So now we have our landing gear laid out. Go ahead and hide those. Let me unhide these motion bases. For these motion bases, these hydraulics are already laid out, so we can go ahead and hide them right away. These three greeble parts back here also have UVs, but I need to fix their names so the suffixes indicate they're polygonal meshes, which means they won't smooth at render time. I can go ahead and hide them. And then I can grab these tubes, which were also made from simple cylinders, and let me just select everything and turn on my border edges. I can just grab all of them, and when I hit unfold, we should get pretty good results. So this is kind of a prime example of what happens when you don't have your scale frozen out. You can see that the UVs were not really what I expected, and freezing the scale out is going to end up being important. So now that I've frozen the scale, I can grab these ones that are unfolding kind of weird, select all the UVs and unfold, and now they've unfolded a lot more like I would expect. So when I froze the scale, a couple pieces on the motion basis kind of went a little haywire, so I need to go in and fix them. You can see if I unhide the hydraulics, freeze the scale, and you can see that the balls of the hydraulics themselves kind of pop out of the sockets. So what I'm going to do is actually grab them, duplicate them, throw them in a group outside of my hierarchy just to have them there as reference. And now when I freeze the scale on the real hydraulics, I can just move the verts of these pieces, kind of change the pivot, and then just align them with where the original positions of the balls were. And so now I'll move the motion-based part over so it's in the right spot. And now let me grab these ball parts and then just snap them into place with their duplicates. Move that piece over as well. And now I can now I can hide the hydraulics, and I can delete the group with the extra balls in them. Let me hide these agreeable parts as well. And now I need to cut the motion-based piece itself. So I'll just do a planar mapping on it. Just do a planar mapping. And then I'll cut kind of around where these boxes are. I'll also cut this seam here. I'll cut these seams around these open areas as well. And now you can see what I've got is basically both halves of the motion base. And what's awesome is that since we just move verts on the smaller plate for the motion base, I can just transfer the attributes to get my cuts, and then I can delete history and unfold them. Alright, so now let me hide everything except for the engine nulls, which I will unhide. And so now let me grab all my agreeable parts. I'll go ahead and pack them. So I've got some of them have reverse UVs, but that's okay. So now I can just go ahead and hide those. Well, I'll add the PLY suffix to them. I also want to make sure that everything has the right naming prefix. I'm going to want everything on the left back engine to have the prefix of LB. And everything on the front engine will have the prefix of LF. So now let's get to work on this rear engine, and I'll start with this main engine cowl piece. I'll just planar map and unfold it. Make sure I'm doing unfold 3D. So it's pretty good, but we're getting some distortion kind of on those bumped out areas. I'm just going to cut those out. Do it down here as well. Now let me grab everything and unfold again. So we're getting a little bit of distortion around the opening. I'll move this piece out of the way, and then I'll actually do my snapping. I'll snap all these points to this center grid here, and then I can unfold this one side. And it's getting kind of like some weird shape here, so I'm just gonna kind of hand move these just to make it a little bit nicer, and then I can do my symmetrize trick, and then that kind of gives me symmetry on this engine cowling. So cut that out. So it's not perfect, but I think this will be good enough. There's not a whole lot of distortion there, so no real cause for alarm. Anyway, let me go, let me just hide this piece, and then can work on this main engine piece, which is kind of just like the underlying blocking geo. So I'm going to planar map this thing, and I'll just cut it up like it's a cylinder. But I think what I want to do, I think unlike my usual cylinder, I'll actually leave these caps kind of off. I'll actually cut this seam along the bottom. Now let me unfold everything. So that's looking pretty good. Let me try and sew these edges. I don't think I want to sew these edges because they're actually a little bit wonky. So let me go back in time and just separate those out again. So that'll be good enough for that. Alright, so let's move on to these engine grill parts. Let me just cut these kind of along the bottom, and then I'll cut them like that and then unfold them, and I think this is going to be good enough. Yeah, I think it'll be fine. So now what I can do is transfer all the attributes. Pretty tedious process. There's a script that I'll try out in a bit that I use once in a while that can transfer to many pieces, but we'll use that later. So now let me cut these edges here. And one of the drawbacks of this cut tool in the UV editor is that you can only cut seams on one mesh at a time, so that's just something to kind of look out for. Just unfold those pieces, make them nice and straight. And for these engine manifold covers, I actually laid out some basic UVs before, and since I reused parts from my other Greeble part, they came with UVs, so just go ahead and unfold them, and I'll deselect some of these UVs so they unfold and straighten out a bit. I don't know exactly why the Unfold 3D algorithm will do that, but it's easy enough to work your way around it. And it's pretty good, minimal amount of stretching. So let me hide the engine manifold cover group. And now let's move on to these kind of tubes and hoses. So I'm just going to planar map all these. I'll just grab the edges and cut. Hit the G key. I'm going to turn on my border edges so we can see. now these should just all unfold pretty well. So that looks good. Just pack those and they look great, nice and straight. So now let me grab these pieces, and I'm actually going to automatically map these ones. But I think what I'll do is I'll come to this side view and I'll just sew all these edges. I'll just grab these edges along the bottom, grow the selection, and then sew those together, and you can see the kind of shape that we're getting here. So now I'll just go around and select these edges here and just hit sew, and that should attach all the tops there. So let me unfold these one more time and pack them, and that's pretty good. So let me transfer to the bottom, and I'll turn my border edges on. So you notice how the border edges are surrounding every face here? This is actually a problem. This means that the transfer did not work properly. And essentially what's happened is it's jumbled up all the faces of the UVs. So this is something to look out for. It's why I like to work with the border edges on, is you can catch this problem. But this happens from time to time. So I'll do the same thing. I'll grow the selection and then sew everything together. You can see I missed those ones in the center there. It's easy enough to remedy. So let me then unfold and pack those. And now I can hide those two. So now let's move on to this engine vent piece. And I'll just I'll isolate it. And I think what I'm going to do is actually cut out this kind of center stalk piece. And I think what I'll do is I'll cut it kind of like this side so it unfolds like a piece of paper. And then I'll cut a seam down the bottom of the other part. Then when I unfold, this is what I get. So you notice this piece has been laid out in the hole 0 to 1. And the reason I've done that is because I wanted to add an engine glow on that. And I'll actually show you guys real quick how I create the engine glow. If I actually do a planar mapping with this from the kind of switch cam view, and I turn off the preserve aspect ratio, now I've got this piece from 0 to 1. So I'm going to go ahead and assign a surface shader. And on that surface shader, on the out color, I'm going to assign a ramp. So now if I isolate this, you can see what this is doing. It's a ramp from top to bottom. I want to change the ramp type to circular ramp. And now you can see that we can control the kind of this gradient from the center to the outside. So let me make this center one kind of like a reddish orangish color. Actually, I'll make it more of like a bright yellowish orange color. And then for the other one, I'll make it kind of this darker orange, and that kind of gives us that gradient of like the heat generated by the engines. So let me just dial the position of that real quick. And now when I unhide, you can see what those engines kind of look like. And that's just kind of a quick, easy way to get this kind of emissive look. And we'll do something similar when we render in KeyShot. So now let me just hide that piece. I'll hide this piece as well. Let me isolate this. So this vent is made up of two different types of fins. So let me UV both of those types, and then we can actually transfer. I'm going to recheck maintain image height and width, and just reproject. So I forgot to turn that off. So now I can just go down the list and transfer the attributes. Make sure these are all getting the same UVs. Cool, so now I can hide those pieces, delete history. And now these other ones are actually, these are just planar geo, so I'm just going to planar map and unfold. And then I'll transfer the attributes. But actually what I could have done is just planar mapped all of them at once and unfolded, but it's okay. Sometimes tedious is good or something. So let me just pack everything except for that engine exhaust. Except for that engine thrust thing that we just made. So now I've got all these things that I've called fuel lines. I'm just going to planar map them. And same as before, just grab an edge and cut. Turn on my border edges. Grab an edge and cut. Grab an edge and cut. Grab an edge and cut, and grab an edge and cut. Etc., etc., etc. So I'm just hitting the G key. And oh, notice some stray edges on these two. I'll just go ahead and fix those real quick. And that's why I really like the UV phase, because it's a final quality control pass over your model. If you do end up missing any, you'll know right away because they won't unfold properly. Now let me pack those together. And this packing is all temporary. We're gonna pack everything a little nicer. It was just I just kind of wanted to start to see what I would be getting. So now let me do these kind of radiator parts. Let's go ahead and cut these edges here. And I think I'll cut the tops. So I'll cut the bottoms. And actually I'll cut the tops too. It'll cut down the length of these and it'll help with the packing. You don't want tubes that are too long and skinny because they tend to kind of mess up the texture space. And now all these clips for those radiator pieces, since they're just planar mapping, since they're just flat, I'll just do planar mapping and unfold. And I'll just pack those. So now all I have left are these outer flaps and the nozzle part. So let me do these outer flaps. And I think for this front one, I'll just do an automatic map. Actually, I'll just do a planar map, and I'll just cut the corners. I think I'll cut this back part off because getting some kind of I'll cut this back part because it's kind of distorted. I think that'll be good. Almost looks like a shape of a spaceship or something. It's kind of cool. So now I'll just transfer all those attributes, but since some of these are different, I'll unfold each one just to make sure they're right. So now let me automatic map these hinge pieces, and I'll just kind of get the two sides. And actually, I'll cut this kind of on the curve here, and just sew them to the other side. Cool. So that's kind of a good. It's kind of good for that. Let me just transfer the attributes down the list. And now for this outer flap, just delete history and hide. Now for this outer flap, I'll just automatic map again. And I'll grab all those edges around the top surface. And then I'll grab these edges on this side surface as well. And then just unfold. And I'll just transfer the attributes really quickly. So now delete history and turn on border edges. Just make sure and turn on the border edges just to make sure that the transfers work properly. Now I can just pack all those parts, hide that group. Now let me tackle this nozzle null. So there's lots of repeated parts in here, and I'm just going to go start at the top of the list. I'll just start at the top of the list and start cutting and unfolding. So for this kind of fakey hydraulic piece, I'm gonna just do a planar mapping, and I think I'll cut this cylindrical piece kind of the base of this cylinder. So I'll cut it around there. Then what I can do is grab this edge, cut down the length of the cylinder and unfold that. And I think I'll cut this inner piece out. And then when I unfold, you can see what I'm getting. So I'm pretty happy with that. So now I'll just go down the list and transfer the attributes to the others. Turn on my border edges just to make sure everything goes well. And actually, I'm going to try this script that I got a while back that I think will work for this, and it's called AJUV transfer, and it supposedly will be able to transfer UVs from one to many. So you activate this script by typing it like this: AJ lowercase underscore capital UV capital T transfer, and then open and close parentheses with the semicolon. You're going to want to make sure it's set on transfer 1 to all, and then what you can do is add the source object and add the target objects, and then it should transfer to all of them. I'll be sure to give this script to you guys this week. So now if I just drag that up to the shelf and create a mel button, I'll just call this AJUV. And now what I can do is I'll just delete history on these and go ahead and pack them. So now I can try and do the same thing here. We'll just do a planar mapping on the first one, and then I'll just cut these edges in the middle here. Or I'll just cut this edge to this one side. And now let me try my AJUV transfer. So then grab all these, put it to source, hit apply. think what might have gone wrong here is that I forgot to check transfer 1 to all. But anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and I'll just go ahead and transfer the old-fashioned way, just to make this quick. Sometimes it's easier to just brute force do the work instead of trying to troubleshoot some tool that isn't working. So it ends up just being faster, just doing it the long way. Now I've got all these. Delete history and pack them. Turn on the border edges. Looking pretty good. Now it's time to do this kind of outer turkey feather plate. So try doing the automatic mapping, and it hasn't done super well, but I'll work with it anyway. So now I'll go ahead and just sew some of these edges together. Unfold this, see how it's looking, and I'll actually grab all these edges and just sew these together. Now I can just grab everything and unfold, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So I'll just oh, I forgot there's a little bit along the edge of it. So that should be, yeah, that's pretty good. Now it's time to transfer all these UVs. So let me try my AJ UV transfer tool again. And I'll add the target and the sources. Click transfer 1 to all. And hit apply, and it looks like this time it worked. So that's a huge time saver as well. So now I'll delete history and pack. It's looking pretty good. So now on to the next piece. And this is going to be kind of a tricky piece to do. There's lots of kind of complicated stuff going on here. So I think I'll do a planar map on this. You know, I think I'll do automatic mapping instead. So I'll move this shell off to the side to kind of work on it. And I'm going to just grab all these edges and sew them, so we have all these parts kind of sewn together. But I'm not really liking how this is unfolding, so I think I'm going to want to cut those triangular louver parts out. You get kind of a side view of this area here. And then what I can do is grab these faces, grow the selection, and then I'll just do another planar mapping, and that'll kind of cut those faces out. So now let me grab all the UVs from them, and I'll just unfold and move them out of the way. So let me attach these edges. Actually, I'm going to make sure these corners are cut first. Now I'll cut these other kind of corners of this extruded area. Let's make sure everything's getting cut. So now I'll sew these edges. I'll sew these edges on the side. attach some of these edges of this piece. Looks like it keeps wanting to connect those corners, so let me just make sure I deselected those and then hit sew again. Sew all these pieces together. Go ahead and unfold that inside piece. Sew all that together. And there's a little bit of distortion, but I'm okay with it because this piece is kind of on the inside of the engine anyway. You won't really see much of it. So let me just do the UV transfer on this. Have my source. Add the targets. Just hit apply. And it looks like it did a pretty good job, so that's cool. Let me go ahead and delete history and then pack all these. And that's looking pretty good. So now this is the last piece here. So I'm going to do an automatic mapping for it as well. I'll select this border edge around the top face of this thing, and then I'll just connect all these parts together, and then I can work on this kind of handle part that slides around the other piece of the turkey feather. So I can go ahead and start sewing some of this stuff together. Sew these corners together. No, it's not super pretty. I think no one's ever going to really be paying attention to these corners. So let me go ahead and I'll actually cut these pieces out, and then what I can do is sew them onto the other side. Just attach these edges. Anyway, I think that's going to be good enough. So now let me grab my AJ UV transfer tool and go ahead and grab my target and set it. Make sure it's on transfer 1 to all. Grab all my sources, make sure my border edges are turned on, and then I can just transfer the UVs. Delete history and pack. And now that's pretty much it. I'll grab all the pieces in the engine and unhide. And I'll just go ahead and unhide the rest of the left back engine. And just out of curiosity, I'll just pack all this together, and you can see all the parts that we have in here. It's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. So I'll turn on this UV checker just to see what the textile density looks like. It's looking pretty good, but I think it's strange that it won't display on all the pieces. It's kind of unusual. Probably just a graphics card issue though. So now off camera, I'll go through the same process with the front engine, and then we could do some UV packing. So now let's talk about packing all these UVs. So first thing I'll do is hide the left side, and we'll just focus on the center for now. And we're going to want to have an even textile density over all these surfaces, which means we want the same amount of pixels per unit, in our case centimeters, across the entire mesh. So if I open up the UV editor, the quickest way to get everything to be the same texel density is to just pack it. So you can see what we have here. But what I'm going to want to do is pack these shells into multiple UDIMs to really maximize my texture space. And I'm going to want to determine my texel density by selecting the largest single UV shell and using it to kind of guide the amount of texture space that each piece gets. Now I could use this large shape, which is actually the blocking geometry underneath the underside of the car, but since that piece is largely hidden by greeble detail, it doesn't really need as much texture space, so I'm not going to let it dictate what the texel density is. Instead, I think I'll use this front fender and fascia shape, and to get it to fill a UDIM, I'll just pack it really quickly, and then I think I'll rotate it and just recenter it. And you can see that the UVs are kind of touching the edge here, so I'm gonna scale it in just a tiny bit. So now let me open my Set Texel Density plugin, and you see this little GUI pops up. And this method of determining the texel density may seem a little janky or ghetto, but it's kind of the best way that I've found, other than the Nightshade plugin, which will basically reorient your entire UV editor to find the texel density. So to figure out what texel density I want, I have this fascia piece kind of filling up the entire UDIM, and I'm going to want to select my map size, which in this case I'll do 4K, which is 4096, and I'll set the texel density arbitrarily to 10 pixels per centimeter. So when I hit apply, you can see that the UV shells shrink down. Now to contrast that, if I enter 20, you can see that the UV shell scales up and kind of gets outside of the UDIM. So we're going to want to try something between 10 and 20. Let's try 15. So 15 is still a little too big, 12 is a little small, 13 is also a little big, 12.5 is also a little big, so I think I'm going to settle on 12, and it shrink it down a little bit, but that's totally fine. So we'll say that our texel density is going to be 12 pixels per centimeter with a 4K map. As a quick aside, I would like to point out that if you're using Maya 2018, they've completely redone the UV editor. So if we load this up, you can see that now there's this UV toolkit on the side, and this is basically similar to the modeling toolkit that would appear in your channel box over here. There's a whole host of new tools in here, most of which are from the Nightshade plugin, and one of which is the texel density, which is here under transform. You can see texel density, pixels per unit. Now if I set my map size to 4K and hit get, you can see that we get our value of 11, which we figured out before. If these were scaled up and you wanted to set it to 11, you would just hit set and it would fix it. Now you notice these shifted around, and that's because when you set the texel density, it sets it at the center of the UV island. Now there are tons of other new features in here that I won't get into right now because I haven't really explored them myself, but if you have Maya 2018, these are all worth looking into. So now what I can do is grab all the other meshes in the center null, apply this texel density, and you can see that they've all kind of scaled up. So I'm going to pull this blocking geo from the bottom of the car off to the side because we're going to deal with that a little differently. And I think that maybe if I were to cut it into pieces, we could pack it better into a UDIM. So let me cut it along here and these two kind of forks for the front fenders. And I'll cut it along the back here, and then we can actually cut these edges as well. Just cut these corners, and we'll basically just cut it into a bunch of little pieces and unfold and see what we get. So I think I'm going to cut this down even further. I'll cut these diagonal corners on the front, I'll unfold everything and hit pack on that for now, but then I'll grab everything. Now I'll apply the UV checker to all these meshes. You can see that the size of the checkers along across the mesh are actually pretty even, which would indicate that we have even texel density. Now I'm going to basically figure out how many UDIMs I'm going to need, and to do that I'm going to turn off shell prescaling. I'll put the shell padding and tile padding to about 15 pixels. I'll set the packing region to full square, and I'll turn the scale mode from uniform to off. And that will extend everything past the that first UDIM. So now I'm going to adjust my grid to be 10 units across and with lines every 0.25 units. Now you can see my U-bounds goes from 1 to 10, which is essentially what Mari uses. So now if I just hit apply, I'm going to want to make sure I hit apply with my scale mode set to off instead of uniform, because uniform will scale it down into 0 to 1. So with the scale mode off, when I hit apply, it packs into, looks roughly about 4 UDIMs. So I'm going to aim to pack all this stuff into 4 UDIMs. And I'm going to want these parts to basically align to a certain axis. So in this case, I'm going to switch the shell pre-rotation to align Z to V. So that'll basically look at the Z axis and align it along the V axis in the UV window. So we have kind of this vertical orientation to all our pieces. So that's kind of a handy tool, especially when you're going to be painting stuff that might need to be directional. So now what I'm going to do is just grab this front fascia piece, which is going to be basically the main part of my first UDIM. And then I'm going to start grabbing other pieces to pack with it and kind of estimate how much space everything's going to take. So I'll grab a handful of pieces and then pack. I'll turn align Z to V back on in my shell pre-rotation. And maybe I set the shell padding and tile padding to 20. So now you can see what we're getting here. I might grab a few more of these pieces. And you can just kind of eyeball how big the UV islands are and see if they're going to fit. So that might have been too much. I'm going to deselect this long drive shaft type piece. And I'll grab this kind of area behind the hood. And so that's looking pretty good. I think that is a good amount of stuff. I think I'll include all these emblems in this first UDIM, but I'm going to want to do a custom pack on these emblems. So what I'll do is I'll just do a quick pack of them. And so now you can see all the little shells are kind of organized into a square. But then I'm going to open up my hypershade. Since these emblems consist of 4 different materials, I'm going to open the hypershade. I'll select all the objects with the black material on them, convert to UVs and move them over. Then I'll select all the parts with the red material on them, convert to UVs and move them over. Then I'll grab all the UVs with the white material and then convert to UVs and move all those over. So now what I'm going to do is just kind of hand pack some of these UVs, because I want them to be organized in a way where it's easy to paint these materials across these parts. So I'm just going to start grabbing shells, kind of moving them into place. So these are all the parts with the white material, and now I'll move on to basically the red material, and I'll flip these over so they're kind of oriented in the right direction. Get the 2 L's together, the 2 8s, the 2 2s, and I'm not being too careful about these, how these are fitting together. Just kind of giving them enough space. So So now here's all the red pieces. I'll stack them above the white pieces. And now here's all the black pieces. So I'll go ahead and move those off to the side. And then I can start just organizing these little black pieces from the emblems together. And I'll try and use what the packing has kind of done already for me as much as I can in terms of how they're all aligned together. So now there's all the black pieces, and let's take all these, finally the silver pieces, and just arrange them together down here. So I've got all these letters, and I'm not even going to be too crazy about spelling out the word Corvette or anything. I'm just going to kind of arrange these parts all together so everything just fits. Got the little fleur-de-lis pieces. Let me just move some of these pieces into place. So now I've got all my emblems kind of organized, and I'll grab all these other pieces that I organized into my first UDIM. And I'll just hit pack again. So now that I've got that, I'm gonna grab these parts as well as all the emblems, and now I can kind of find a place for these emblems to live within this UDIM. So maybe I can move this piece down here to make a little room in this top corner. I can move this shell out of the way. Move this one over this way. And really I'm just kind of moving pieces around. So maybe instead I move this part here, move this part down there. Let's see, where can I move this part? So maybe this part gets moved to a different spot. And then I'll move my emblem parts up there. Now I'm just gonna rotate this piece so that it gives me a little more room to play with. And just look around and try and find places to put all this stuff. I can put that piece over here. Put that piece down here to give that a little more room. Move this piece. Get it over here. So I don't like to do a whole lot of hand placing of UVs, but sometimes it's helpful for organizing when you're when it is time to texture paint, and it's helpful too to keep similar parts that go together. It's helpful to keep them kind of together. But anyway, I'm pretty happy with that. And when I'm painting in Mari, I don't like to keep anything on 0 to 1, just because I view 0 to 1 as kind of like a workspace. There's been times in production where, for example, when they do fracture on a building or something for a destruction sequence, there's been times where I had my stuff laid out in 0 to 1, and basically when they fracture the mesh, all the new faces that are created end up in 0 to 1 and are expecting to get some kind of a broken rock texture or something, for example. And I basically had to hand pick out my hero UVs and move them out of 0 to 1 so they would get the right texture. So I learned from that lesson, and I never keep anything on 0 to 1 just for that reason. To me, it's kind of the UDIM where everything ends up that doesn't need custom packing or is still work in progress. So now I'm going to create a layer called UV'd, and I'm just going to throw these parts in there as I finish them. So I'll close up my hypershade. And actually it looks like the texel density of 12 just isn't quite right for this quarter panel. So what I'm going to do is play around with this a bit. I thought that the front fascia was maybe the largest piece, but it looks like these quarter panels actually are. So what I'm going to do is I'll figure out a new textile density. Maybe 11 is better. So yeah, I think that what I'll do is I'll use the textile density of 11 instead. So now let me grab my pieces I already UV'd, repack them, and I made sure, by the way, to deselect my emblems so I wouldn't lose that layout. And then let me grab that drive shaft piece and repack. So now I get to fit that drive shaft piece in there as well. So now if I grab, I'm just going to grab everything in the C null and apply the textile density of 11 to it, just so I have it. And I'm going to select the car parts that I UV'd already. And I'll just move the UVs over to kind of 1 to 2, I guess. And now I'll kind of reposition where I want my emblems to be. So let me move these football shaped things out of the way. And I can actually move some of these pieces up and out of the way as well. I think these are the white pieces. I'll move them down here. So now I can sort of fit this piece in there. And now I've got a pretty, now I've got my UVs for that first unit. So I'll put them back on that layer. So now the next piece I'll grab is the hood. And I'll just start grabbing more greeble pieces with it. And then if I think I've got a good amount, I'll hit pack. So you can see I still have a lot of room. So I'm just going to continue to grab greeble parts that I think will fit and hitting pack until I get close to that 0 to 1 space. I don't remember UVing these parts before, so I'm just going to do a planar mapping and unfold them, and then I'll set their textile density to 11 as well. And now I can start grabbing the pieces that I had with the hood and start packing them. So maybe this cap could work as well. So now I've got all these parts. I'm going to move these over from 2 to 3. And actually, I'll add these objects and select all the other objects. So now I've got my first 2 UDIMs kind of set up here. So you can see I don't have too many pieces left. So maybe I pack all these last greebles with the actual windshield. Yeah, so that looks like it's fit pretty well. But we have some parts that are kind of sticking out over one, so I'm just going to hand pack these last few parts together. And I'll move these shorter ones over to this area so I can put the longer ones over here. Move these as well, and move this part over here. So now I've got, let's see, where can I put this one? Move this crescent shape up and move these parts down. And now I can move this long skinny part over here. So let's call this my third UDIM. And now I'll add these parts to my UV layer. And you can see that the only real parts I have left are the quarter panel and the underlying blocking geo. So I'd love to be able to fit them together somehow. And I can move this hood piece over to the first UDIM here. So I think what I'm going to do Actually, here's what I'll do. I will grab all the faces on the right side and delete them. And now what I have to do is just fit, and now what I'll do is just fit these parts into the UDIM with the quarter panel. And then when I mirror the other side, it will just, the UVs will just be stacked. Since this is just a blocking shape, that doesn't really need unique textures on both sides. Plus, most of this model is essentially symmetrical anyway, so I think this plan will actually work out fine. So let me move this piece up here so I can move this big blocky shape down here. And then I'll just try and fit the rest of these pieces in wherever I can. Let me just grab that and move it over to the fourth UDIM, basically, which is actually the fifth UDIM over instead of the fourth. So now that'll be the packing on my center null. So now let's get started on the left null. So there are a few pieces on the left null that I don't want to disturb. Mainly they're the headlight pieces that have bump. Eventually I will want these packed in with the rest of my UVs, but for now, since I want to render these two parts with the bump maps that I already have existing rather than painting them in Mari, I'm going to leave these UVs at 0 to 1 so they can basically have that texture already. So I'm going to grab all those and just hide them for now. So I'll go to my tail light nulls, and I think what I need is lens B and lens D, and then lens B in this one, and I can just hide those. And actually I'll this blocking geo for the engines, so I'll just type in the in the search field up here, I'll type in star glow PLY star, and then I'll grab those two engine glow pieces and I can just go ahead and hide those as well. And now I'll just grab all the other meshes and apply the texel density of 11 to them. So now let me look at the landing legs. It looks like they aren't going to take up a full UDIM. So maybe I can also include the wings, maybe the door as well. Actually, let me grab all of these nulls and then I think let me hit pack and see what we get. So we actually have a lot of, we're actually going to be able to fit a lot of these things in this first UDIM for the left side. So we're kind of going over, but I think the reason is that this this big tube is just longer than 0 to 1 at this texel density. So I'm going to actually go in and just cut a couple seams into this long like muffler tube shape. And I think with that, if we grab all these nulls, and actually I think what I'll do is start to organize these parts together in a way that makes more sense. So I'll grab all the headlights and kind of keep them clustered together. And then I'll cluster the landing legs together. I need to move the headlights. So now I've got these two shapes and I can kind of well, that's not very good packing. So now maybe I grab these other four shapes, or these other four parts, and now I can kind of grab all these things, and I think I can actually just play essentially a game of Tetris and fit all these together. So I'm going to I'm just gonna move some things around in this UDIM and see if I can fit all these pieces together. So I'll move these the glass down to the corner, And I'll move some of these radiator pieces out of the way to give myself some room. Could even stack them kind of closer together like this. Move the glass closer to the door. This is, I believe, the rudder to the wing. Move the door this way. Move this rudder piece. I think that might be the bottom of the wing or something. Yeah, I can start to basically move some of these UV shells kind of out of the way, so we can pack all these things together. So move the door down there. Move this shape down here. Actually, I'll make this vertical, and I can squeeze it in there. Now if I move the landing leg group up here and the headlight group here, now all I have to do is figure out where I'm going to stick these radiator pieces. So maybe I'll move that piece up here, and then I can probably just massage this area so everything fits. So now I'll move these two radiator pieces in here. And then I'm going to move these up, actually. I'll add them to my group. Select all the objects. All those tiny little bolts in there. So now I'll just grab all these UVs and just move them up by 2. Add them to my UV group, hide them, and now we can kind of move on to another piece. Actually, let me grab the engine nulls and hide them, and then let's grab these motion base nulls. I'll grab the bigger motion base and pack it, and you can see that it packs it to about 0.6 in both directions. So what I'm going to try to do is set kind of a custom bounds for this other motion base, and see if it'll fit it in next to this first one. So if you set the packing region to custom, you can type in these values, and it'll actually pack them into that region. If I pack these in like this, I can basically get it to fit in the negative space of the other one. So now you can see I've got these two motion-based pieces, and they're fitting together within 0 to 1. So now I can grab the tube null and hit pack on it. Oh, and it's going to do it in that. Let me reset this. I'll just set this to top half and see what we get. Actually, I'll set it to custom. And I'll set the V from 0.65 to 1. And you know what? I'll just set it to full square. I know I can make this fit with the motion bases. So let me just grab everything, and then I'll start to kind of custom hand pack some of this stuff. Just because I know I can get these tubes to all fit together. So now let me just move some of these tubes into this corner. I'll move all these over so they're even with the side, just to give myself more room. I'll just scoot all these other ones over, so I'm really maximizing the space that they take up. Grab these and kind of straighten them out. Move them over like this. And let's grab these bigger pipes from the other tube and just kind of orient them this way so I can fit everything. Maybe we'll put these ones over here. Now let me grab this other big tube and these smaller ones. Basically trying to work here from big to small, and fit all these tubes in with each other, basically. So now these three can probably fit together pretty well. Move that off to that side like that. Now what I can do is just sort of move all these into place. Move those down. Move these ones down as well. Now give myself more room for those pieces. So I'll move these over. Kind of fit these other ones in here as well. So that's working pretty well. Now I've just got these two big pieces to contend with. I'm going to move all these over this way, actually. And we can move all these over as well. Pack those all a little tighter. Now I can put these two big tubes up here, and now I can figure out a spot for these smaller ones. So maybe I move these a little better. Move that one down in here. And shift everything around a little tiny bit. So now I've got all these tiny pieces here, and they're all the sort of hose clips from these wire looms. I think what I'll do is I'll just grab the faces of them and isolate the faces, grab all the objects in object mode, and then I can pack those and kind of get them into a square as well. But it hasn't done a super good job with this, so I'm gonna orient them horizontal and pack them again, and then this'll help me to squeeze them in because they're already oriented in the right direction. So now I'll just kind of move these parts in where I can. All these long skinny parts here. Move that one in there. And now I've just got all the sides of the clips to contend with over here. I'll squeeze some of them in there. Basically just filling in any open space that I have. And maybe fit 3 in there. Fit some along this way. Looks like teeth. And now all I have are these little screws that I can just squeeze in to these areas here. So probably fit 6 there, and then I'll fit the rest there. So now I've got the motion bases and tubes packed into a UDIM, and I can move them up by 2 and over by 1 and stick them in my UV group. So now let me look at the greeble null, and let me see if this will all pack together. So it doesn't look like it'll all pack together, so I'm going to just sort of grab the front half, and that looks like it actually fits pretty well. So I'll just scoot it up 2 and over 2, and that'll be my third UDIM. So now I'll grab the rest of the pieces and hit pack. Okay, so I'm getting this issue where it says mesh has non-manifold UVs, clean up mesh before continuing. And I think what that is because this one piece has like reversed UVs. So let me try this again. Yeah. So the error is that there's a mesh in here that has non-manifold UVs. I have no idea what mesh it is. So and Unfold 3D is the only one that really cares about this. So I'm gonna actually just run a cleanup. I'll reset the settings, check non-manifold geometry, and hit cleanup, and it must have worked. I really don't know how to figure out what it's done, so I'll just trust that it worked. So let me pack these together. I'll deselect the box. Maybe I'll deselect these pipes as well. And I'll just repack. And now it seems like it should fit a little better. Actually, I've got this tank thing here, and really half of it is totally covered by the mesh, so I'm going to delete half of those faces. And I think we're actually close enough that I will just change the scale mode to uniform so it fits everything into 0 to 1. And then I'll turn that off and just hit apply one more time and just pack all these parts into a UDIM. Because it would be a lot more work to actually make sure everything's fitting properly. So I'm actually going to move this up just to make sure, because I didn't quite remember where the other UDIM was. But now you can see my greeble null is laid out across those two UDIMs. Now basically all we have left is the box and the pipes. So let me see if there's a place for that. It doesn't quite look like it. So I'm just going to come back to those later. So let me unhide my engines, and then we'll work on packing them. So let me go ahead and pack the front engine. And it looks like we might be able to fit the box and the pipes with this front engine. It's sticking out a little bit, so maybe I'll just try the front engine and the pipes. And that's looking pretty close. Let me move this off to the side. Just for now. I'll add them to my layer. So that's fine. So let me try packing the back engine, and it looks like it's just a little too big. It probably needs to fit onto 2 UDIMs. So I'm going to grab just a handful of these groups and pack them together. And it looks like we're still a bit over the 1 UDIM. So maybe I'll just do the grill, nozzle, and outer flaps. And not the inner vent, and that'll be 1 UDIM that I do. And so let me move those pieces up. I'll just move them up and out of the way, and then add them to the UV null. And then I think I can probably just pack the rest here. Yeah, the rest looks like it will fit. Let me see if I can fit it with the let me see if I can fit it. I don't know if I could actually fit it with the box. But maybe what I can do is I'll turn the front engine and pipes to uniform so they fill up the full UDIM. And I'll just move them up and out of the way as well. So I'll grab all these fuel lines and radiator line clips with the manifold and the box shape, and then maybe some of this top vent parts and the engine hoses, and let's see if I can pack all these into 1 UDIM. Okay, so that looks like it'll work. Now let me see if I can I'll move that out of the way, and then we'll just inverse the selection. So to select just these parts on the right, I'm going to actually select all the faces, isolate the faces in the viewport, and select the objects in the viewport, and then I can pack. So these last two groups of parts don't quite take up full UDIMs themselves, but in order to maximize the amount of texture space I'm using efficiently, I'm going to repack each of them so they take up the full UDIM. And they'll get a little bit more texture space than everything else, but the difference won't be that noticeable. And then I'll grab all these faces on this one and isolate and select the objects and then do the same. So now I can grab all three of these parts and just move them up, and now grab all three of these UDIMs. And let's grab everything from the left side. So now what I can do is kind of organize these UDIMs. I'll move this one over and to the end there because it's the vents and nozzles, and then I'll just take these four UDIMs, move them across and down. So now I've got the center and left side all UV'd. I'm just going to delete my UV layer, and then we'll have a look at our layout here. Last thing to do is grab that underlying blocking geo, and I'll just do a mirror on it. And you can see that the UVs have turned this kind of purple color, and that's basically because those two halves of that are sitting on top of each other. But that'll be fine for the texturing process. Yeah, I'm just going to select the whole hierarchy and unhide. You can see that my light bulbs and engine glow strips are at 0 to 1 there, so those will still pick up their same texture. I think that when I'm ready to actually texture paint these, I'll UV those properly and kind of stick them in sort of the empty spots. But yeah, now all our UVs are packed and ready to be mirrored over. So now that we have our UVs all laid out and packed, I'm going to want to mirror the left side over to the right side for reals, not just our quick duplicate with input graph and do a negative scale. I want to actually mirror the hierarchies and freeze all the transforms. So first I'm going to save a new version of this. Always save a new version when you're going to do this step. So I'm just going to save this as week 9:05. I'll just hit save. So now there's a few things that I need to do here. First of all, I have animation on some of these parts. So I'm going to want to grab the top null, select the hierarchy, and I'll go to my animation editor's graph editor. And if I just hit F and frame up on all these keyframes, I'm going to grab all these keyframes and get rid of them. So now if I scrub my timeline, no animation is happening. The next thing I need to do, and I'll show my NURBS curves here, the next thing I need to do is delete all the constraints that I've made in here. So for example, if I grab this motion base and I hit F in the outliner, so this is our basic setup for these hydraulics. What I'm going to want to do is get rid of all these constraints. So the easiest way to do that is actually up here. If I type star constraint star, and then that will select all my constraints, and you can see that all these handles have turned purple because the constraints affect their history basically. So if I just hit delete on all these constraints, you can see that now all my motion based parts are broken. Essentially they don't move anymore. So now I'm free to take the left side, duplicate it, just a normal straight up duplicate. Then I can scale it -1 in X. And then what I can do is actually go to modify here. We'll do search and replace name, and we'll just replace L with R. And if I hit apply, okay, so that took forever, but it's finally done. Now you can see we have our R space vet null. You can see we have R throughout our entire hierarchy. So I'm just going to delete this 1 on the end of the null. And now you see I have my left, right, and center nulls all here. And what I'll do is I'll save quickly. And then I will grab everything. I'll just grab this top null and I will freeze transforms. So this will freeze all the transforms in this entire hierarchy. And you can see it's finished. So now my left and right nulls all have frozen transforms. So the last step is to take the right side space vet null and let's just isolate it. And now I'll grab all these UVs and I'm going to move them down by 1 UDIM. And that's the final step. So now as a modeler, this model is essentially complete. But what I like to do is go in and recreate all the relationships I had with all these constraints. So let's start with these landing legs. So let's open up this LF landing leg null. And you can see that normally to animate this landing leg, what I would do is rotate this landing leg 1 ground null, and that should drive all of these hydraulics, but since we have nothing set up, obviously it does nothing. So what we have here are handles and aim constraints, and we're basically going to recreate this relationship, but since we have these groups kind of labeled for what they need to be, you see we have handle and then this, and then we have the aim and then the aim. So really we just need to select these, create our constraints, and then everything should work. So let's start with this main one here. I'll grab this first aim constraint, which is a locator, and this one, and then let's just do an aim constraint. And then I'll select them in the opposite order and do an aim constraint there. So next I need to recreate my parent constraints. So what I'm going to do is grab this handle and this null, parent constraint, and then I'll grab this aim and parent constraint, grab this handle and this null and parent constraint, and then grab this aim and parent constraint. So now if I rotate this ground null, you can see everything is coming along for the ride. But there's more to it than that. So next let me reattach this hydraulic. So we'll follow the same procedure. Let me just find this hydraulic in the hierarchy. So we've got handle and aim, handle and aim, and then we've got the null and the aim. So what we can do is grab these and I'm just gonna close these so I don't get confused. I'll grab these two aims and do the aim constraint, and then I'll grab them in the opposite order and do the aim constraint again. So then I'll grab this and this, do my parent constraint, this and this, another parent constraint, this and this parent constraint, and then this aim and this aim null and parent constraint. So now what I essentially need to do is anchor these handles to what they attach to. So what I can do is actually grab this mesh and grab this handle and do a parent constraint, grab this mesh and grab this handle and do a parent constraint. And then when I rotate this ground null, you can see that the shock now has its behavior again. So what I'll do is set a key here on rotate X, and then go to 10, and we'll just rotate this by -60. And that has kind of recreated that action there. So I also need to recreate the rotation of the skid null. So I'll keyframe rotate X, and then at frame 10, I'll animate in my 60 degrees. So it basically counter rotates with the ground null. And now now I can set up this second hydraulic. So let me just open this up. I'll open up my handle and my aim, and then my group with my aim null in there. So now what I can do is grab these two aims, do the aim constraint, grab them in the opposite direction, do the aim constraint, and then what I can do is grab this parent to the aim, grab this parent to the null, grab this parent to the null, and grab the aim and parent to the aim null. So now what I need to do is grab this mesh, grab this, and do another parent constraint, grab this mesh and this handle, and do another parent constraint. And now I should see my landing gear behavior happen right as I expect it. So I'll go ahead and do the rest of the landing gear off camera in this same way. But for now, let me set up a couple of these motion-based hydraulics as well, just to reiterate this process. So I'll just grab my motion-based handle, which is here, and we'll just frame up on that. So the hose null is driven by this handle, so I can select this handle, grab the hose null, and just do an aim constraint. And now I can move this around, and you see the hose null will follow it around. So that was the easy part. Now let's go through these hydraulics and figure out what we need to do. So I'll grab hydraulic 1, and we'll just open all these up. And now I just need to grab the two aims, aim constraint, grab the two aims, aim constraint, and then just do my parent constraints. Grab these, parent constraint, and grab these, parent constraint. And I'll just do that for the rest of these really quickly. So as you can see, this can be a very tedious process, especially if you have tons of hydraulics in your scene like I do. But this is definitely a good reason to stay on top of your hierarchy naming and organization. So now what I can do is I can actually grab this handle, and I'm going to use it to parent constraint. So this, parent constraint, this, parent constraint, this and this, parent constraint, this, parent constraint, and then finally this parent constraint and this parent constraint. And now I can take this handle and then grab this parent constraint, this parent constraint, this parent constraint, this parent constraint, and this parent constraint, and finally this and parent constraint. And now I have successfully reattached my motion base. Oh, and it also helps to grab this, and this. Also need to be parent constrained, so I'll just parent constrain them as well. And now when I move this all around, we're getting what we expect. And if I move it this way, the hoses come along as well. So that's how you easily reattach some of your constraints. You can also at this phase go back to the rigging lesson and hook up some of your set-driven keys for like the landing gear and stuff. It's important before you redo some of your rigging that all your transforms and all your meshes are frozen, just so everything is nice and clean. So that's going to be it for this week. I'm going to want you guys to have your UVs all laid out and packed like this, or at least be most of the way there, since they're not completely necessary for rendering, but they're definitely necessary for handing this off to a texture artist. I'm not expecting you guys to have your rigs all reattached, but it will be helpful to have them set up if you need to pose your model for rendering. If everything went well over the course of this class, by the end of this week you should be looking at a completed model with finished UVs, ready to hand off to a texture artist and a rigger. And if so, you deserve a big pat on the back for a job well done. But in the meantime, I hope you have fun laying out and packing your UVs.